August 17, 1943, southern Germany near Schweinfurt. The sky is a hard blue sheet, thin and cruel at roughly 26,000 feet. A B-17 Flying Fortress grinds forward on 4 engines, its aluminum skin trembling under the strain. In the tail compartment, Staff Sergeant Frank Hayes, tail gunner, sits cramped behind curved perspex. His breath fogs the glass. His gloved hands brace the grips of twin 50 caliber machine guns. Outside, the bomber stream stretches in layers and stacks, a moving city of aircraft that cannot afford to scatter. A flak burst blooms below, black and sudden. The fortress shudders as fragments slap the fuselage like thrown gravel. Hayes keeps scanning. Left edge, right edge, straight back. He listens to the interphone. Clipped callouts, altitude checks, calm that feels forced. Then he catches it, the change in sound, the rising whine that does not belong to his engines. He leans into the rear view, searching. The threat is not straight behind. It is lower. It is sliding beneath his sightline, into the place tail gunners talk about with a tight mouth and tired eyes. The blind spot that turns confidence into panic. Hayes tries to dip his guns, tries to force his view downward, but the geometry fights him. The fighter is there. He feels it, yet he cannot confirm it early enough. The bomber jolts again, and his stomach drops as the attacker snaps up into view far too close. Hayes fires a short burst. Tracers arc into the sky, bright for an instant, then swallowed by distance. He corrects, fires again, fighting vibration, cold, and the brutal speed of the pass. In seconds, the fighter breaks away. Whether from hits or simply pressure, he cannot know. What Hayes knows is simpler. A gap in his vision almost became a hole in his aircraft. What he doesn't know, what nobody realizes yet, is that the answer to this blind spot will not arrive in a crate from a factory. It will start with a small mirror, rigged by hand, changing what a tail gunner can see in the half second that decides everything. To understand why a mirror matters, you have to step back into the bomber war as it exists in 1943. The doctrine is clean on paper and ruthless in practice. Daylight bombing, tight formations, mutual defense. The planners trust geometry. They build combat boxes, stacking bombers so their guns overlap like hedges of steel. Each fortress carries about 10 men, and the theory says those 10 men, multiplied across hundreds of aircraft, can carve a path through enemy airspace. But the bomber war is never fought in theory. It is fought in weather, vibration, fatigue, and fear. It is fought in the last long minutes of a bombing run, when the aircraft must fly straight and level because a bomb site demands steadiness. In those moments, the bomber becomes predictable. Predictability invites attack. The B-17 is famous for defensive firepower, especially in later variants that can carry up to about 13 50 caliber guns. That sounds like invincibility, but the guns do not fire themselves. A human eye must spot the threat. A human brain must judge lead. A human finger must control bursts. And all of it happens while the enemy closes fast enough to turn a mistake into catastrophe. The Luftwaffe learns where the theory bends. Rear attacks can be costly because the tail is watching, so the fighters slide off center. They come from the low rear quarter, climbing into the tail, or they attack head-on, where closure is so fast that even a perfect gunner gets only a heartbeat. A fighter can appear, fire, and vanish in the time it takes a man to say, "Bandit, 12 o'clock." And this is the real problem Hayes cannot stop thinking about. It is not that he cannot shoot. It is that sometimes he cannot see soon enough. In the air, soon enough, is its own weapon. But then, the system has an answer ready, and it sounds confident. The official answer is always discipline. Scan harder, train more, hold formation, trust coverage. The doctrine says the box works. It says blind spots are minimized by overlapping guns, by procedure, by men doing their jobs correctly. Hayes respects the doctrine, because doctrine keeps men alive. Yet he also feels its limit in his neck and shoulders after hours of scanning. He feels it when glare turns a fighter into a ghost. He feels it when cloud haze flattens distance. The doctrine assumes you can watch every approach forever. A human being cannot. A tail gunner's world is a narrow universe. Glass, metal framing, the curve of the tailplane above, the thin wedge below. The deadliest approach is not always the one with the most noise. It is the one that hides in a few degrees of geometry, just low enough, just offset enough, so you are forced to guess before you can confirm. Hayes begins to notice patterns. He notices how often the 6 low call arrives late, not because men are careless, but because the sector is difficult. He notices how often tracers appear too early or too late, chasing an aircraft already moving away. He notices something even more personal. When he fires without a clear sight picture, he loses confidence, and confidence is a resource you cannot waste. The numbers of 1943 make the anxiety heavier. On this same date, August 17, 1943, the Schweinfurt-Regensburg raids send about 376 B-17s deep into Germany, and roughly 60 are lost. That is not a statistic to accrue. That is a shadow over every briefing. It tells you that even fortresses can be torn open by tactics that find the gaps. Hayes is not a designer. He is not an officer. He is a sergeant sitting in the tail, expected to defend a machine that must keep flying straight. He is the underdog in the purest sense, the man assigned to watch the direction everyone else tries not to think about. And he becomes obsessed with one question. What if the blind spot is not permanent? What if the eye can be helped? But then, he bumps into an idea so simple it feels ridiculous. It begins on the ground, not in the air. An English airfield, damp wind, dispersal huts, men walking with mugs of tea that taste like metal. Hayes sees a fighter pilot climb down and tap a small rearview mirror, an ordinary reflective aid used in some cockpits to check behind without turning the aircraft. It is not dramatic, it is just practical. Hayes stops, almost embarrassed by how quickly his mind grabs it. If a pilot can use a mirror to see behind, why can a gunner not use a mirror to see below and behind, not to aim? Not to replace his main view, just to catch movement in the sector that ambushes him. He brings it up quietly among gunners. Some laugh, some shrug. Mirrors are for shaving, they say, or for signal kits. Bombers are not meant to be modified by sergeants. And then Hayes describes the 6-low problem in plain language. He describes the way a fighter can climb into position without showing itself early. He describes that sick moment when a target appears already committed. The laughter fades because every gunner has felt that moment. Still, there is pushback, not evil pushback, practical pushback. A loose mirror could become a hazard. A reflection could cause glare. A bracket could snag in an emergency. In a bomber, anything that is not secured is a threat. So Hayes does not treat this like a stunt. He treats it like a tool. He finds a small mirror, something like a compact or signal mirror, small enough not to block, but large enough to show motion. He builds a simple bracket from scrap, testing it with care. He angles it so that, with only a slight eye movement, he can see into the low rear sector that used to be guesswork. He tells himself one rule. The mirror is not an aiming device. It is an early warning eye. Spot in the mirror. Aim in the main view. That distinction will keep him alive. But then, there is a brutal truth waiting. Mirrors can lie. A mirror reverses. A convex mirror widens view but shrinks objects. In a car, the warning is printed in plain words. In a tail turret, there is no warning label. There is only the possibility that your brain will misjudge distance at the worst moment. Hayes tests the rig on the ground first. He has a crewmate walk behind the tail, then crouch low. Hayes watches the movement in the mirror, then snaps his eyes back to the direct rear view, training his mind to treat the mirror as a cue, not a ruler. Then he worries about vibration. In flight, the tail shakes. A mirror that looks stable on the ground might chatter in the air, blurring into uselessness. Hayes reinforces the mount. He tightens fasteners. He braces the bracket so it does not tremble like a loose tooth. He also thinks about glare. A mirror can catch sunlight and flash. He angles it slightly and shields the edges, keeping it out of direct reflection lines as much as possible. He does not want to paint a beacon on his own tail. Finally, he climbs into the aircraft for a test flight. The mirror sits there like contraband, small, harmless, and yet quietly rebellious. This is not how war is supposed to work, the manuals would say. Innovation is supposed to come from the top, but war does not care about pride. War cares about what works. Hayes watches his new setup. Direct view, mirror. Direct view, mirror. He does it until the rhythm becomes automatic, like breathing. And then he waits for the only judge that matters, combat. But then, combat arrives in the most ordinary, terrifying way. A mission begins with boredom, and boredom is dangerous because it softens you. Hours of engine drone, hours of scanning a sky that looks empty. Hayes keeps his rhythm anyway, even when his eyes ache. Mirror check, direct scan, mirror check, direct scan. Crossing into enemy airspace, the formation tightens. There is a reason for that tightness. Overlap, mutual defense. But there is also a cost. If you hold formation, you give up maneuver. You become a predictable line in a predictable direction. The fighters appear as specks first, then as shapes. Hayes watches them dance around the edges of the formation, probing like wolves testing a fence. He tries to track one group, then another. His world narrows. Then, in the mirror, he catches a flicker low and behind. Not a clear aircraft, just movement. Wrong movement. His heart rate spikes. Bandit 6 low, he calls. That is the first win. Not a hit. A warning. A half-second earlier than before. In air combat, half a second can be the difference between a fighter settling into a firing line and being forced to brake. Hayes swings the turret and finds the fighter rising into view sooner than it would have otherwise. He begins tracking before the attacker is perfectly lined up. He fires a short burst, 1 second, 2 seconds, then stops. He watches the fighter's reaction. The attacker jinks, pulls away, refuses to commit fully. Hayes does not claim a kill. He cannot. In the chaos of many gunners firing, kills can be uncertain, but he feels something that matters more. He has denied the enemy the cleanest moment of the pass. The fighter breaks. The fortress keeps flying. Hayes exhales, realizing he had been holding his breath for several seconds. The mirror did not shoot the fighter. The mirror bought him time to be ready. That is the real currency. But then, after landing, the mirror becomes a different kind of problem. On the ground, the crew chief spots it. The crew chief is a man who respects improvisation until improvisation hurts someone. He steps closer, frowning. "What's that doing back here?" Hayes explains carefully. "A sight aid. Early warning for low 6. Supplemental only." An officer hears about it. He comes to inspect. His questions are reasonable and sharp. Is it secured? Does it obstruct movement? Does it create glare? Are you relying on it too much? Hayes answers honestly. He emphasizes the rule. Spot in the mirror, aim in the main view. He shows the mount. He shows how it can be removed quickly. He shows how it does not block the gun sight. The officer's response is the voice of doctrine. "We can't have every crew changing aircraft procedures," the tone implies. "If everyone improvises, someone gets hurt. The aircraft is built this way for a reason." Doctrine says the limitations are baked in. The doctrine says you overcome them through training, not gadgets. In that worldview, the mirror is a distraction, even an insult, because it suggests the system is not complete. Hayes does not argue loudly. He cannot, but he thinks of the moment when the fighter appeared late. He thinks of the holes he has seen in returning bombers. He thinks of the men who did not return. If a small device can steal surprise back, is it really wrong? The officer does not forbid it outright, at least not yet. He warns, he watches. He makes it clear that if anything goes wrong, Hayes will carry the blame. Hayes tightens the mount again that night anyway, because then another tail gunner approaches him quietly. "Can you show me how you set it up?" That is how innovations spread in war, not through paperwork, but through whispers between men who want to survive. Hayes brings the gunner into the tail. He demonstrates the rhythm. Direct scan, mirror check, direct scan. He explains glare risk. He explains vibration risk. He explains the danger of treating the mirror like a rangefinder. Soon, a few more aircraft carry similar rigs. Not identical. War rarely standardizes early. Some use a slightly convex mirror for wider field of view. Others prefer flat glass to reduce distortion. Some mount it higher, some lower, depending on their turret framing and personal comfort. And each variation creates debates. Convex gives you more view but shrinks targets. Flat gives you truer shape but narrower coverage. A larger mirror is easier to spot movement in, but more likely to snag or reflect glare. A smaller mirror is safer but less useful. The system notices the spread. More officers inspect. More warnings are issued. Safety concerns are real. A mirror that breaks could create sharp fragments. A loose mount could become a projectile in turbulence. A mirror could distract a gunner at the wrong second. So Hayes begins refining his philosophy. The mirror is not for constant watching. It is for momentary checks. It reduces surprises. It does not remove danger. Then the mirror rig faces a hidden consequence nobody expects: crossfire timing. But then, that consequence shows up in the sky, suddenly and close. On a later mission, the rear defense wakes faster than usual. A low approach is spotted earlier. Multiple gunners open fire sooner, trying to deny the attacker time to aim. And in that chaos, Hayes sees something that tightens his chest. Tracers from another bomber's waistgun slash through a corridor uncomfortably near his line. No one wants to talk about friendly fire, but it exists. In a tight formation with overlapping arcs, the margin for error is thin. If everyone engages the same target at once, bullets can cross in dangerous ways. Hayes hears sharp calls on the interphone, warnings, corrections, urgency. He realizes the mirror rig changes not only his awareness, but the formation's reaction speed. Faster reaction can be good. It can also become messy, if not disciplined. So Hayes adjusts again. He becomes more selective with firing. He uses the mirror to begin tracking early, but he waits to fire until he has a safer line and a better chance of forcing a break. He keeps bursts short, 1 second, 2 seconds, then stop, watch, correct, fire again if needed. The mirror's gift becomes restraint. That is unexpected. A tool that could tempt a gunner into spraying ammo instead encourages smarter timing, if the gunner respects what the mirror is. And this is where the doctrine says impossible conflict turns sharp. The doctrine assumes the blind spot must be endured. Hayes shows that the blind spot can be managed, carefully, responsibly, by shifting perception. But then, the enemy adapts, as enemies always do. Luftwaffe fighters begin to feint. They dip low to trigger early fire, then break away before committing, hoping to make gunners waste ammunition. Some approach head-on, where closure is brutal. 2 aircraft rushing together so fast that decision time feels like a single breath. Others approach low, then roll away at the last moment, daring gunners to shoot at long range. Hayes learns to read intent. The mirror helps him recognize a feint sooner because he can see the approach path earlier, not just the final pop-up. He watches geometry, the line of climb, the angle of closure, the moment a fighter begins leveling into a firing position. He begins calling out not only 6 low, but climbing, braking, continuing. Those words matter. They help other gunners decide whether to fire or hold. And slowly, a change spreads that no officer can easily measure with paperwork. Gunners become better at anticipation. They stop reacting late. They begin reacting early and intelligently. The mirror rig is not officially standardized in this story. It does not need to be. Its power is in the mindset it trains, a refusal to accept surprise as normal. But then, weather moves in, and weather does not care about mindset. Clouds flatten everything. Sun glare turns glass into a mirror of white. Haze makes distance meaningless. At altitude, the cold creeps into joints and turns breath into crystals on the inside of perspex. Hayes wipes his view with a gloved hand and feels frustration spike. A fogged mirror is useless. A frosted mirror is worse. It tempts you to stare at nothing. He shifts back to fundamentals. He scans patterns. He listens for callouts. He looks for contrails. He watches for movement that breaks the stillness of the cloud underside. Then the mirror catches it again. Faint. Low. A shadow sliding where it should not. The mirror does not show details, but it shows change. Hayes snaps to the direct view and finds the fighter earlier than he would have. He begins tracking. He waits. He does not waste ammo on a guess. At around 600 yards, he fires a short burst. The fighter breaks. Hayes stops firing immediately, not chasing. He watches. The fighter repositions, trying again. Hayes tracks again. At about 500 yards, he fires another short burst. The attacker breaks harder this time, refusing to settle. Again, no dramatic claim. Just a spoiled pass. Just a bomber that stays intact long enough to keep flying. In the air war, that is a victory even when it is quiet. Hayes feels the same lesson repeating, the mirror buys you the first half second. What you do with it is discipline. But then, discipline brings the system back into the story, because systems want control. The more the mirror rigs spread, the more officers worry about standardization. Variation makes them nervous. If a gunner transfers crews, a differently placed mirror could confuse him. If an emergency bailout happens, anything protruding could snag. If a mirror breaks, the fragments become hazards. These concerns are real. Hayes responds the only way an underdog can, by making the rig safer, smaller, more secure, easier to remove, less reflective outward. He avoids placing it where it could catch a direct sunbeam. He also teaches a principle that calms some pushback. The mirror is optional. It should never replace the main scan. It should never become a crutch. It is a tool for that one sector where a tail gunner's eyes and station geometry are weakest. In time, a gunnery officer, skeptical but practical, admits something in a debrief. Rear warnings are arriving earlier. Tail gunners seem less surprised. The formation's rear defense looks more coherent. The officer does not praise mirrors. He praises awareness. That is how institutional acceptance often begins, not by celebrating rebellion, but by recognizing results. By 1944, escort coverage improves on many missions, reducing the bomber's isolation, but escorts do not erase the need for gunners. Fighters still break through, rear attacks still happen, the blind spot still exists. Hayes' rig remains relevant because it targets a human limitation rather than a technological one. But then, Hayes discovers the mirror's most unexpected effect. It changes his endurance. Hours in the tail can crush a man mentally. The sky is empty until it is not. The fear of surprise burns energy constantly. Hayes finds that quick mirror checks reduce that background panic. Not because he is safe, but because he feels less blind. He can confirm the low sector without twisting his body constantly. That alone keeps him sharper longer. Sharpness matters. Fatigue makes men sloppy. Sloppy scanning creates gaps. Gaps invite attacks. The mirror rig, used properly, helps Hayes keep a cleaner scan rhythm over long missions. 6 hours, 7 hours, sometimes 8 hours, depending on route and conditions. The mirror does not save him by itself. It helps him keep doing his job with less mental erosion. And because Hayes stays sharper, his callouts stay calmer, his bursts stay shorter, his corrections become cleaner. The mirror becomes less a gadget and more a training partner, forcing him into a consistent habit. This is the point where the story becomes bigger than one mirror. It becomes about underdog insight. The doctrine says you must endure the blind spot. The underdog says you can reduce it without breaking the whole system. But then, the danger of success appears. Rumors. Stories spread faster than reality. Someone claims the mirror rig doubles hits. Another says it solves low 6. Another says it becomes a secret weapon. Hayes hears the rumors and feels uneasy. Exaggeration creates overconfidence, and overconfidence kills. So he tells the truth whenever he can. The mirror gives early warning. It helps you begin tracking sooner. It helps you time bursts better. It does not guarantee hits. It does not make you invincible. It can create glare if mounted poorly. It can distract if you stare. It can create hazards if secured poorly. He insists on the rule again. Spot in the mirror, aim in the main view. He repeats it until it becomes doctrine at the crew level. On one mission, a new gunner tries to watch the mirror too long and misses a higher threat. Hayes corrects him afterward. The mirror is a tool, not a tunnel. You must scan like a human radar set, sweeping sectors with discipline. That correction matters because war punishes ego. The mirror rig is not about being clever. It is about being methodical. And then, the final proof comes not as a kill, but as a saved moment. Another mission, another stretch of enemy airspace, another set of fighters probing the rear. Hayes checks the mirror and catches movement low, early. He calls it. A nearby bomber's tail gunner swivels. Waist gunners prepare. The fighters hesitate, seeing the defense already awake. One commits anyway, climbing hard. Hayes tracks. He waits for the leveling moment, when the attacker must steady to aim. At that instant, he fires a tight burst, about 2 seconds. The fighter breaks off sharply, rolling away rather than holding the line. In Hayes' mind, he sees two versions of that pass. The version where he spots late, fires late, and the fighter gets a clean shot. And this version, where he spots earlier, fires at the leveling moment and forces the break. Nothing explodes, no cheers, just a bomber that stays on course and stays alive. Later, during the return flight, Hayes watches the mirror reflect nothing but cloud and the thin curve of Earth. He realizes the mirror is doing its job perfectly when it shows him nothing. Nothing means no surprise. Nothing means the enemy did not slip into the gap. And in war, sometimes nothing happened is the best sentence you can say. But then the war ends, and the tactic becomes a memory. Quiet, almost invisible in big histories. When people remember the bomber war, they remember the big things. Targets, raids, factories, famous aircraft, famous generals. They do not always remember the small adaptations inside the aircraft, but those adaptations are where survival often lives. A mirror rig is not glamorous. It does not win medals by itself. It does not change strategy. It changes a man's half-second. It changes surprise into warning. It changes a blind sector into a checked sector. The B-17 remains a symbol of resilience, not because it is perfect, but because it is a platform crews learn to fight with, again and again, through discipline and small improvements. In a fortress, every station is a sensor. Every gunner is part of a system. And when one station becomes less blind, the whole system becomes slightly stronger. Hayes' story is a reconstruction built from the known tactical realities bomber gunners faced. Low rear approaches, scan fatigue, and the constant need to adapt. The mirror itself stands in for a broader truth of combat. Doctrine provides structure, but survival often depends on small, careful innovations that respect that structure while addressing reality. Now picture the closing image. A battered B-17 limps back toward England at dusk. The engines drone unevenly. The formation is thinner than it was at takeoff. Fewer silhouettes in the sky. The coast appears like a dark line. The airfield lights glow faintly through haze, small and steady. In the tail, Hayes is still facing backward. His hands are stiff. His eyes are raw. He checks his mirror one last time, just a quick glance, and sees only cloud, only fading light. No shadow rising from low 6. No sudden shape snapping into view. He does not smile. He simply exhales, slow and controlled, as if letting the entire mission leave his body through a single breath. The mirror catches the last orange smear of sunset and throws it back at him like a quiet promise. And the fortress keeps flying until the wheels finally touch the runway, the vibration turning into a thump that feels like mercy. So, here's my question for you, because this story isn't only about war, it's about thinking under pressure. If you were a tail gunner, would you trust a small mirror rig for that early warning? Or would you rely strictly on doctrine, even if it means living with the blind spot?